There are cases that are closed because the truth is clear, but there are also cases that are closed simply because no one wants to dig any deeper. On November 30th, 1981, the police concluded that Natalie Wood's death was an accident at sea. The file was archived. Hollywood continued to operate as if nothing had ever happened. Yet many years later, witnesses began to change their statements. Details that had once been overlooked gradually resurfaced, and the husband who had been seen as the most pitiful victim in the story suddenly became the focus of suspicions that have never subsided. Then, after more than 4 decades of silence, Robert Wagner unexpectedly broke that silence. In a rare conversation in his later years, he looked back for the first time at the fateful night on the waters off Catalina, recalling memories that for many years he had almost never wanted to speak about. In the end, over the past 40 years, what exactly had he been hiding? I knew the weather was about to turn bad, but I still let the boat leave the dock. In a filming session conducted in the final years of his life, Robert Wagner sat quietly in front of the camera. Behind him, a half-closed window let in the late afternoon sunlight that touched a face etched with the marks of time. For a long stretch, he didn't utter a word. His gaze remained fixed on his hands, which were trembling slightly on his lap. When he finally broke the silence, he spoke in a hoarse voice so slowly it was as if he were confessing to himself. I knew the weather was about to bring a storm, but I still agreed to let everyone set sail. No one in the studio said a thing because everyone understood that what Wagner was referring to was not simply the storm on the Pacific Ocean on November 27, 1981. It was also the storm that had swept away his life along with the woman he loved most deeply, Natalie Wood. Dennis Davern, the captain who had worked with Wagner for many years, brought the weather warning report and placed it in front of him. He said frankly that the trip should not begin under those conditions. Wagner did not react immediately. After a short pause, he only replied in a low voice, "Just set off. I need to be alone." But for those who truly understood Robert Wagner, they knew that what he was seeking had never been quietness. What he truly wanted was to confront the things that had been tormenting his heart. A few weeks earlier, Hollywood had been buzzing with a series of rumors involving Natalie Wood and Christopher Walken, who was co-starring with her in the film Brainstorm in North Carolina. The Los Angeles Herald-Examiner published a photo of Walken placing his hand on Natalie's shoulder at a cast party. The caption below was short but full of implication. "One look can say 1,000 words." Not long after, People magazine added fuel to the fire by commenting that between Walken and Wood there existed an energy that was hard to name, one that carried both artistic tones and a hint of danger. Within just a few days, those images and articles appeared on newsstands everywhere from Beverly Hills to New York. And once again, Robert Wagner was cast in the role of the husband facing a test in the glamorous world of Hollywood. They had once been regarded as an iconic couple of the American silver screen. Married in 1957, divorced in 1962, and reunited with another wedding in 1972. After a decade apart, they returned to each other in front of the flashing lights of countless photographers. Vanity Fair magazine once described them as a gentler version of Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. Yet behind that perfect image were long-existing cracks. In the context of a Hollywood still heavily influenced by patriarchal thinking, jealousy gradually became a smoldering fire in Wagner's heart. In the early 1980s, his career was no longer maintaining its previous momentum. In contrast, Natalie Wood was preparing to return to film after a long period devoted to family. The invitation to join Brainstorm from director Douglas Trumbull filled her with excitement. And Christopher Walken, who had just won an Oscar for The Deer Hunter in 1978, possessed a cool charm and a conversational ability that made the person opposite him feel truly understood. During filming in North Carolina, Natalie and Walken often had lunch together. They talked about art, fame, and the price one pays for celebrity. One crew member later recalled, "The way you looked at Natalie was the kind of look that could make any husband feel uncomfortable." Everything truly exploded when David Wallace, a reporter for The Hollywood Reporter, happened to spot the two having a private dinner at a restaurant in Wilmington. The newspaper then ran a prominent article with the headline, "Wood Walken, When Friendship Steps Outside the Frame." Robert Wagner read that article in his private office in Beverly Hills. He slammed the paper to the floor, poured a full glass of liquor, and muttered angrily, "Or is she no longer my wife anymore?" According to his manager at the time, Wagner even forbade anyone in the house from mentioning Christopher Walken's name. Natalie knew about it, but did not argue. In a diary discovered many years later, she left only a short line. Bob is jealous. I'm tired, but maybe he's just afraid of losing me. About a week later, Wagner suddenly suggested that the whole family take a getaway. He said he needed to get away from Hollywood for a while. However, instead of choosing a peaceful place on land, he selected the open sea, something Natalie had always feared since childhood. Dennis Davern was tasked with preparing the yacht Splendor, a 60-foot vessel moored at Marina del Rey. However, the decision that surprised everyone the most was Wagner inviting Christopher Walken to join the trip. When Davern expressed surprise, Wagner replied curtly in a cold tone, "I want everything to be made clear." On the afternoon of November 27, 1981, the Los Angeles sky was covered with gray clouds. Light rain began to fall. Natalie appeared in a cream-colored coat and sunglasses, quietly boarding the boat without saying much. Walken arrived later with a small suitcase in hand, politely greeting everyone. Wagner was the last to board. He carried a bottle of liquor and gazed intently toward the distant horizon. Many years later, when recalling that moment, he said, "I don't know exactly when the wind started to rise. The only thing I know is that from the moment the boat left the dock that day, there was already a storm inside me." And indeed, it was not just the storm off Catalina. It was also the tempest that would sweep from his life everything he had once held most precious: fame, love, and the last remaining peace. Because just over a day later, when the first glasses of liquor were poured on the waters near Catalina Island, Robert Wagner's jealousy would begin to push everything into a chain of tragedy with no way back. Should I admit it? I hid the truth to avoid trouble. But in the end, I lost myself. Early in the morning of November 29, 1981, the waters around Catalina Island were still filled with patrol boats. Strong winds blew across the cold water as search teams continued to comb the area around the yacht Splendor. At 8:15 a.m., Officer Roger Smith of the Los Angeles Police Department reported back to headquarters that they had discovered the body of a woman about a mile and a half from the boat. When the rescue team approached, they realized it was Natalie Wood. The famous Hollywood star was floating face down in the water, her black hair partially covering her face. She was wearing a red coat over a nightgown and wool socks, clothing completely unsuitable for being on deck in the freezing weather. Nearby was the dinghy Valiant, its engine off, the key still in the ignition, and the oars neatly tied as if they had never been used. A young officer present that day noted in his report that the scene did not feel like an ordinary accident, but more like a staged setting. When investigators boarded the Splendor, Robert Wagner was already waiting in the main cabin. Despite eyes red from lack of sleep, he maintained a surprisingly calm demeanor. According to LAPD records, Wagner stated that around midnight he heard the dinghy banging against the side of the yacht. Natalie said she wanted to go out to check the anchor lines because she feared they might be loose. He thought she had returned to the cabin afterward. It was only the next morning, when he didn't see his wife anywhere, that he realized something was wrong. Wagner's statement was delivered evenly, almost without showing emotion. To many of the young officers involved in the case, he appeared as a grieving husband who still had control over himself. One person later recalled, "I once thought he seemed like he was acting, but he was too convincing for anyone to question." On November 30, 1981, Police Chief Ronald Brown signed the investigation conclusion. The report clearly stated there was no evidence of criminal activity. Because all involved had consumed alcohol that night, Natalie Wood's death was ruled an accident. Officially, the case was closed. But the story had not truly ended.